Economics Research in collaboration with the School of Economics and Social Sciences at the IBA Karachi. This year, our theme is on development and the discourses and critiques surrounding that theme. To start with, I'd like to call upon the Executive Director of IBA, Dr. Akbar Zaidi, to speak with the audience.
السلام علیکم ایوری باڈی، ویلکم ٹو دی آئی بی اے. میرا کام بہت مختصر ہے کیونکہ میرا کچھ اس زیادہ کوئی کام نہیں ہے اس کے علاوہ کہ میں آپ کو خوش آمدید کہوں، ویلکم کروں. مجھے آئی بی اے میں 2 سال ہو گئے ہیں، لیکن میں آپ کو یہ بالکل وثوق سے کہہ سکتا ہوں کہ اتنی بڑی آڈینس، اتنا ویل آرگنائزڈ کانفرنس، اتنی بھرپور طرح سے آئی بی اے میں پچھلے 2 سال سے کوئی ایکٹیویٹی نہیں ہوئی ہے. ظاہر ہے کووڈ بھی تھا، اور اس سے یہی پتہ چلتا ہے کہ اب ہم شاید ایک ایسے مقام پہ پہنچے ہیں کہ آئی بی اے میں جس طرح کی کانفرنسز ہوتی تھیں، انٹرنیشنل، نیشنل، لوکل کانفرنسز، دیٹ وی ول ریٹرن ٹو دیٹ ماڈل. اینڈ آئی ہیو ٹو تھینک 2 or 3 پیپل who have given their day, night, سارا دن، ویکینڈ وغیرہ، اور ان کو سننا بھی پڑا ہے. جو ان کے سینئر لوگ ہیں ان کو بہت دفعہ سنا بھی چکے ہیں. تو کچھ لوگ ہیں جن کا میرے خیال ہے ذکر کرنا بہت ضروری ہے. پھر میں کانفرنس کے بارے میں تھوڑا سا بتا دوں گا، لیکن میرے خیال ہے میرا فرض یہ ہے کہ جن لوگوں نے اتنی محنت کی ہے آپ لوگوں کو یہاں بلانے میں اور اس پورے انتظام کرنے میں، اور اگلے 3 دن میں وہ جو کریں گے، تو اس میں ڈاکٹر اسما حیدر ہماری ڈین ہے اسکول آف اکنامکس اینڈ سوشل سائنسز کی، ڈاکٹر لیلا فاروق ہیں وہاں بیٹھی ہیں، وہ ڈائریکٹر ہیں CBER کی. ان کے ساتھ ان کی جو ٹیم ہے جس میں حسان، سارہ، حرم، دوسرے لوگ، سفینہ، اور اسٹوڈنٹس ہیں بہت سے. سفینہ ہماری اسٹوڈنٹ ہیں، امان، عبدالعظیم، وارا، سمین احمد، کلیم اللہ، صہیب اور عالیہ نقوی یہاں پڑھاتی ہیں سوشل سائنس میں. اینڈ دی اکنامکس کلب اینڈ دی IBA SSLA club. I think they have done an extraordinary job in first just organizing. We talk about the content later. The intellectual contribution depends on you people. It depends on them to bring you here, to put you up, to accommodate you, to facilitate you, to make your stay comfortable, and to make sure that this event takes place. So please join me in giving them a very warm round of applause. Thank you all of you for a fantastic job to start with, and I hope I'll be able to say this on Sunday as well. یہ نہ ہو جائے کہ ابھی میں نے بہت تعریف کر دی پھر آگے پتہ نہیں کیا ہوتا ہے. لیکن وہ ابھی 2 دن ہیں، وہ اب آپ لوگوں پہ ڈپینڈ کرتا ہے. یہ جو ہماری کانفرنس ہے یہ پچھلے سال بھی ایک ہوئی تھی، اور وہ ایک عجیب حادثہ ہو گیا تھا پچھلے سال ہم صبح کو شروع کرنے والے تھے، شام کو ان کو سارہ کو اور لیلا کو ایک میسج آتا ہے کہ کل سے کرونا لگ گیا ہے پاکستان کو، کل سے سارے تعلیمی ادارے بند ہو رہے ہیں. تو آپ سوچئے کہ ان لوگوں نے اتنی ہی محنت کی تھی جتنی اس دفعہ کی ہے لوگوں کو لانے میں اور جو سارا کچھ سیٹ اپ کرنے میں، اور ان کو چند گھنٹے پہلے بتایا گیا کہ یہ کانفرنس نہیں ہو سکتی. اور ان پہ جو گزری وہ خیر وہ اب تاریخ کا ایک حصہ بن گئی ہے، IBA کی تاریخ کا بہت بڑا حصہ بن گئی ہے. لیکن ہوا یہ کہ انہوں نے کہا کہ کوئی بات نہیں، اگلے دن سے انہوں نے کہا کہ ہم ورچوئل چلے جاتے ہیں. تو یہ IBA has a system, a network, facilities which allow us to provide, to make decisions very quickly. And one of the things about COVID, جب COVID یہاں 2 سال تھا، اور مجھے معلوم ہے یہاں پہ بہت سارے اسٹوڈنٹس آئے ہوئے ہیں، فیکلٹی ممبرز آئے ہوئے ہیں، بہت سارے اداروں سے آئے ہوئے ہیں، بہت ساری یونیورسٹی سے آئے ہوئے ہیں. IBA صرف 1 دن بند ہوا ہے پورے 2 سال میں. کووڈ کے وقت میں صرف 1 ہی دن بند ہوا ہے، اور وہ بھی کسی بچے نے وہ شیطانی کی تھی. اس نے کہہ دیا مجھے کووڈ ہو گیا، جب پتہ چلا اس کو ہوا نہیں تھا. ہم گھبرا گئے ایک دم، ہم نے بند کر دیا. لیکن اس کے علاوہ 1 دن کوئی کلاس نہیں ہوئی، بند نہیں ہوئی. تو یہ ہمارا چلتا رہا. تو IBA میں وہ صلاحیت ہے، وہ ہم اس طرح اڈیپٹ کر پائے. تو انہوں نے، سارہ نے اور لیلا نے اور ان کی ٹیم نے پچھلے سال جو کیا تھا، we were still able to have a virtual conference. So this year again we invited a number of very well known scholars from abroad. کہ ہم نے، ظاہر ہے آپ لوگ جانتے ہیں جب اس طرح کی کانفرنسز ہوتی ہیں تو اس کے لیے کئی مہینوں کی محنت کرنی پڑتی ہے. تو ہم نے بہت سارے لوگوں کو بلایا. اس وقت کووڈ چل رہا تھا، ان کا کہ دیکھیں گے. پھر جب کووڈ آہستہ آہستہ ہٹنے لگ گیا، پھر یہ اومیکرون آ گیا. تو اس کے باوجود یہ کئی 100 لوگوں کو یہاں لانے میں کامیاب ہوئے. اچھا اب آ جائیں اس کے کانٹینٹ پہ. اس کا ٹائٹل جو ہے یہ جیسے بتا رہے ہیں کہ ڈسکورس اینڈ کرٹیک. میرے خیال ہے کہ ڈیولپمنٹ جس کو بھی ہم کہتے ہیں مختلف لوگ مختلف نام دیتے ہیں. ہمارے یہاں اینتھروپولوجسٹ بیٹھے ہیں, وہ کہتے ہیں ڈیولپمنٹ نام کی کوئی چیز نہیں ہوتی. ہمارے پورے پلاننگ کمیشن میں جو لوگ کہتے ہیں ڈیولپمنٹ ہی ڈیولپمنٹ ہوتا ہے. کہاں ہوتا ہے یہ مجھے ابھی تک نظر نہیں آیا, لیکن وہ کہتے ہیں ڈیولپمنٹ ایک بہت بڑی, پاکستان بہت ترقی کر رہا ہے, ڈیولپمنٹ ہو رہی ہے. اسلام آباد میں شاید ہو رہی ہو, لیکن اور جگہ کم نظر آتا ہے. تو یہ ہم کوشش یہ کریں گے کہ ہمارے یہاں جو آئے ہوئے ہیں, اسٹوڈنٹس بہت سارے آئے ہوئے ہیں, ایکیڈیمکس آئے ہوئے ہیں, پریکٹیشنرز آئے ہوئے ہیں, ایسے لوگ آئے ہیں جو اختلاف کرتے ہیں. میں نے مثلاً کل کا ایک سیشن ہے, اس کا نام ہی اختلاف ہے, ڈسینٹ, کہ ہم کہیں گے یہ کیا ہے, یہ ہم کس ملک میں بیٹھے ہوئے ہیں. اور یہ آج کل کے دور میں ہمیں یہ نہیں پتا تھا کہ 27 مارچ کو یا 25 مارچ کو کچھ ہونے والا ہے, لیکن شاید ہم نے اس کی تیاری کر لی تھی. تو یہ جو اختلاف کا جو ایک موضوع ہے, اختلاف رائے دینے کا جو پورا حق ملتا ہے کہ رائے بھی نہیں دے سکتے. تو ایک آپ خود سوچیے, ڈیولپمنٹ ایک ایسا شعبہ ہے, ایک ایسا علاقہ ہے, ایک ایسا ایکیڈیمک ڈسپلن ہے that if you do not have the ability to disagree, if you do not have the ability to contest arguments, then there is no development. And development is not just about buildings, it's about thought, it's about ideas, it's about institutions. How do we talk about an institution which doesn't allow others to develop? Very important question. You can guess which institution I'm talking about, but there are one or two. So how do we talk about that? When we talk about development, it's not about schools and buildings only. It's very much part of that. It's very important. We need better schools, we need better education, we need better health facilities, we need more rights for women. I mean, that's the first thing that we need is more rights for women, more freedom for women, more access to women. I mean, there are some women here, I wish there were 3 times as many. And unless we have a society, a country in which women have more than equal rights, I mean, unko to bhi rights bhi nahi milti. So, if we don't talk about these things, I'm not just talking about gender parity, I'm talking about a fundamental part of whatever we call development, whether that is in marriage, whether that is in the domestic household, whether that is dealing with patriarchy, or whether that is being a prime minister or being in the planning commission or being a professor. I think without women being a lead part of our society, we cannot have development. And we need to question that as well. I mean, I'm surprised that we even saying کہ ہاں شاید ہونا چاہیے. شاید کا کیا مطلب ہے؟ ہونا چاہیے, ختم بات. تو لیکن ڈیولپمنٹ کا پورا جو خاص طور پہ میرے لیے خاص طور پہ جو ایک مقصد ہے وہ یہی بنتا ہے کہ ہم ڈیولپمنٹ صرف یہ نہ دیکھیں کہ موٹر وے کتنے بن گئے, ہائی ویز کتنے بن گئے, وہ ضروری ہے. پاور سے ہم کتنا پروڈیوس کریں وہ بہت ضروری ہے, لیکن آپ یہ بھی دیکھیں کہ ہماری سوچ آگے بڑھی. کیا ہم جو مختلف خیالات کے لوگ ہوتے ہیں ان سے ہم بات کرنے کے لیے تیار ہوتے ہیں؟ ہمارے ملک میں روز اس طرح کے واقعات ہوتے ہیں جو ہمیں بتاتے ہیں کہ ہم کوئی دماغ میں ہماری کوئی نئی چیز نہیں لے کے آئی. روشن خیالی تو دور کی بات ہے, ابھی تو بلب بھی نہیں جلا, تو وہ تو بات کی بات ہے. روشن خیالی تو ہوگی جب کچھ روشنی ہوگی, وہ ڈھونڈیں ہم کہاں. تو یہ ڈیولپمنٹ کا بہت بڑا حصہ بن جاتے ہیں. تو آپ دیکھیے گا اس کانفرنس میں ہم نے مختلف طرح کی دیکھی. ٹریڈ پہ بھی بات ہے, مینوفیکچرنگ پہ بھی ہے, جو ٹریڈیشنل چیزیں کہتے ہیں. اباؤٹ دی اکانومی وی آر ٹاکنگ اباؤٹ, وی ٹاکنگ اباؤٹ دا سوشل سیکٹر, دیر از اباؤٹ دا پریس, دیر از اباؤٹ جرنلزم, دیر اباؤٹ لاٹس آف ڈفرنٹ ایریاز. اینڈ دیر از آلسو دس ویری اسٹرانگ نوشن آف وی وانٹ, ہم اختلاف بھی کرتے ہیں, ہم رائے بھی رکھتے ہیں, ہم بحث بھی کرنا چاہتے ہیں. اور میرے خیال سے میرے لیے, میں اکانومسٹ ہوں, کچھ اور تھوڑی بہت سوشل سائنس بھی تھوڑی بہت پڑھی ہے, لیکن میں سمجھتا ہوں کہ ٹھیک ہے, ہم 40 سال سے کم از کم میں اور میرے بہت سارے یہاں کالیگز ہیں, ڈاکٹر نصرت ہیں, ڈاکٹر آسمہ ہیں, عابد برکی ہیں, بہت بڑے بڑے اکانومسٹ پاکستان کے یہاں ہیں, اور لوگ بھی ہیں جو بیٹھے ہوئے. ہم کئی دہائیوں سے یہ کام کرتے آ رہے ہیں, لیکن میں کبھی ہم سوچتا ہوں کہ ہم نے کیا, ہم کہاں پہنچے. کیا 30 سال پہلے یا 20 سال پہلے, مجھے تو لگتا ہے کہ 1990 کی جو بحث ابھی ہو رہی تھی وہ دوبارہ سے ہونے لگ گئی ہے. آئی ایم ایف سے ہم نے جان چھڑائی نہیں. آئی مین آئی ایم ایف, ابھی وہ ملک ترقی کیسے کر سکتا ہے جو آئی ایم ایف کی گود میں بیٹھا ہوا ہے؟ یعنی آپ یہ دیکھیں, ڈیولپمنٹ کا نام تو یہاں لکھا ہوا ہے, لیکن میرے لیے ایز اے پولیٹیکل اکانومسٹ سب سے زیادہ شرم کی بات یہ ہے کہ ہم ریکارڈ جو توڑے جا رہے ہیں وہ یہ کر رہے ہیں کہ آئی ایم ایف کے پاس سب سے زیادہ ملک کون سا جاتا ہے؟ پاکستان. آئی ایم ایف کے پاس جو ملک جاتا ہے سب سے زیادہ پروگرام کس کے فیل ہوتے ہیں؟ پاکستان. آئی ایم ایف کے پاس کے سب سے زیادہ قرض کون سے ملک لیتا ہے؟ ناٹ ان ایبسولوٹ ٹرمز بٹ ریلیٹیولی پاکستان. تو ڈیولپمنٹ کہاں سے ہوئی؟ وہ ملک جو اس کو امداد کہتے ہیں, امداد کا لفظ میں نہیں کہوں گا, جو قرضے لیتا ہے, اگر وہ قرضے کی بنیاد پر 72 سال 75 سال قرضے لے رہا ہے تو وہ ڈیولپ کہاں ہوگا؟ सोच भी नहीं डेवलप होगी, हस्पताल और तालीम और औरतें और ये तो बहुत दूर की बात है। तो ये ऐसे पहलू हैं जो हम चाहते हैं कि आप लोग, आप एक्सपर्ट्स भी हैं, स्टूडेंट्स भी हैं, और हमारे पास जैसे डॉक्टर अस्मा और डॉक्टर लैला बताएंगी कि इसका एक्सपेंस कितना है। तो मुझे जो इस प्रोग्राम में जो लगा, और ये मैं आपको वाज़ेह तौर पे, अभी डॉक्टर समीना खलील बैठी हुई हैं, उन्होंने कहा कि आपको बहुत मुबारक देनी, मैंने कहा मेरा इससे कोई ताल्लुक नहीं, मैं बिल्कुल इससे पीछे हट जाता हूँ, मेरा आई हैव नथिंग टू डू विद दिस कॉन्फ्रेंस, इट्स ऑल लैला एंड अस्मा एंड हर टीम दैट हैव डन दिस, एंड देव लुक्ड एट द पेपर्स, देव इन्वाइटेड यू, देव गॉट द कॉन्टेंट, सो द इंटायर क्रेडिट goes to them, and they are responsible for bringing in students from all over Pakistan, from faculty from all over Pakistan, policy makers from institutions, well-known institutions in Pakistan, from government sector and private sector and international organizations, and they make this, and to make this what I think will be one of the most important academic events of the year. I welcome you all. I hope you have a good time. Our hospitality, कराची की hospitality, आपको पता है कराची में सारे लोग आ जाते हैं, पता नहीं कहाँ कहाँ वीज़े के बगैर भी आ जाते हैं, आप लोग वैसे ही आए होंगे, टिकट लेके आए होंगे, तो यू ऑल वेलकम टू कराची, वेलकम टू दी IBA, अपना घर समझें, आप घूमें फिरें, हमारे स्टूडेंट से मिलें, आपका दी IBA campus is open for you, and I hope you have a warm and comfortable stay, and also that it is intellectually stimulating, and when you leave, I hope you will say कि अच्छा ये development था क्या? That for me would be the success of this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zaidi. I'd now like to call upon Dr. Asma Haider, the Dean of the School of Social Sciences and Economics, to say a few words.
First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Zaidi, for your generous words. So dear colleagues, friends, faculty members, students, I would like to welcome you here at this conference. The title of the conference is, as all of you are aware, Development, Discourses and Critique. So I'm not going to discuss. Dr. Akbar actually explained a lot about the conference. My life is much easier now. I just want to share that we put a lot of effort to shape the program of the conference, and I'm looking forward that how the discussion evolved during these 3 days. And we tried our level best that the content of the conference is useful for researchers, for policymakers, for students, for international institutions working in Pakistan, civil society, so everybody can get benefit out of it. Because so many students and faculty members from different areas are here, so I'm finding it very difficult not to say anything about the school. The School of Economics and Social Sciences was established last year in January 2021 when Dr. Zaidi took the initiative for academic restructuring at IBA. The purpose of this, the establishment of school was to acknowledge and to acknowledge the identity of the different discipline and to move toward more specialization in social sciences. So right now in School of Economics and Social Sciences, we have almost 46 full-time faculty members. Among them, 30 are the PhDs. And the population, the student population is almost 1,100. And we have 2 departments. One is Department of Economics and Department of Social Science and Liberal Art. So Department of Economics is a very well-established department. We have 2 undergrad degrees, 1 MS program, and we also offer the PhD degree as well. So School of Social Sciences and Liberal Arts, we have 1 undergrad program with 4 specialization, which is again a very good degree, and with wonderful electives and specializations. And last year we started 1 grad degree, that is MS in Development Studies. So high quality research is one of the top priorities of the school. And so that's why we have 2 centers. One is the center, so these 2 centers are also in School of Economics, Social Sciences. One is Center for Business and Economic Research, and the other is Population Research Center. So Dr. Laila Suhail is Director of Center for Business and Economic Research. She will talk in a minute. about the center and also about the conference. But here I must acknowledge that Dr. Laila Suhail gave a new direction to the center. And the way the team is working, I am sure that CBR, very soon, CBR will evolve as one of the leading think tanks of the country. Before I finish, I would like to thank Executive Director Dr. Akbar Zaidi for his consistent support, for his guidance, and for his encouragement. Many thanks to all the members, Dr. Laila Suhail, Sara Nizamani, and Hassan, all the students, volunteers, administration, our sponsors, our friends from industry and from the government. They were all very, very supportive in organizing this conference. So thank you, everyone. I'm sure that all of you will find this conference very useful and interesting. And I would request, please give us your feedback. And once again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Asma. I'd now like to call Dr. Laila Farouk, the Director of the Center for Business and Economics Research.
Thank you, Safina, and thank you, all of you, for being here. As Dr. Zaidi said, it's nice to have you in person. We've had a rather difficult 2 years of talking to each other through screens, so this is really nice. And of course, thank you, Dr. Zaidi and Dr. Asma, for your very generous words. We all work in the machinery, and all these parts come together at events, so we're happy to be here. I'll just take 2 minutes. At the Center of Business and Economics Research, we seek to create a discourse around critical approaches and approaches to things like development, economic growth, employment. We tend to talk about these concepts as isolated from the human experience. We tend to talk about them in terms of numbers and trajectories, and we forget that there's also complexity around power hierarchies, around marginalization, around human stories. And I think with this theme, this year, we have tried to bring that to the forefront and to talk about development in a broader perspective. Of course, there's a very mainstream perspective, but also these other discourses that are there. So we hope that you will walk away from this conference with that, maybe with something new in your mind about development. I think I'll just go over a few housekeeping things. So just bear with me for another minute. We have quite a few things here. So there is a conference app. If you want to look at the conference program, we have a printed brochure that you would find inside your folder. Other than that, we also have an app that you can download. There is a QR code on the registration desk if you're looking for a QR code. The app has everything. It has the program. It has the abstracts for the different papers that are being presented in the technical sessions. It has venues, so it will be very helpful. Then just a couple of things on the venues. The lunch will be served on all 3 days at the Student Center, which is a few steps from here. And for technical sessions, since so many people are presenting, we have over 100 papers being presented. So we have the technical sessions spread across 3 buildings. So you must check the venue in which your technical session is scheduled before you go there. And we also request presenters to go to the session 15 minutes in advance so that your slides are up and the session starts on time. Also, just a note, we have a lot of volunteers around. If you need any help with anything, any information, you can ask anyone with a blue or a green ribbon, and they'll be able to help you with directions or with anything else. I hope I'm not forgetting anything. I probably am, but I'll catch up. I mean, you can just get hold of us and ask us questions. Just one announcement. After the first keynote speaker, Dr. Mushfiq, we have a tea break. We would request that all the students that we've invited from outside Karachi keep sitting and move towards the front of the auditorium. And that's because we would like to talk to you as students, and we would like to take you around on a campus tour. So please stay back. Also, anyone who's from outside Karachi and wants to get an orientation of the IBA campus, please stay back in the hall while the others proceed to tea. So I will stop, and I think we move to the first keynote. I'm going to request Aruj to please come up, Aruj Vahid. who's a faculty member at the School of Economics, and Aruj will be introducing Dr. Mushfiq and then also moderating the session. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I am Aruj Waheed, and it is my great pleasure to host this segment of the conference entitled Seasonal Migration and Seasonal Poverty. Our keynote speaker for this session is a world-renowned economist of Bangladeshi origin, Dr. Mushfiq Mubarak, who is a professor of economics at Yale University. He is also the founder and faculty director of the Yale Research Initiative on Innovation and Scale. Dr. Mubarak has conducted extensive amount of research, including many field experiments in developing countries to explore new ways of encouraging people to adopt behaviors and technologies that improve welfare. More recently, he has been scaling and testing strategies to address seasonal poverty in Bangladesh, Nepal, and Indonesia. Most of his recent research efforts are directed toward finding effective responses to the disruptions that have materialized post-pandemic, especially in developing countries. He has joined us today to talk about his research on seasonal migration, its causes, impacts, and how we can mitigate those negative impacts. Dr. Mubarak, a very, very warm welcome to you. You have 45 minutes to talk about your research, which will be followed by a Q&A session. Thank you, Dr. Mushfiq, for joining us. I now request you to start presenting your research work. You have 45 minutes to present, which will be followed by a Q&A session.
If you can hear me, I just wanted to check whether my slides, full screen slides, are visible.
Yes, we can hear you, Dr. Mubarak.
You're on mute. I can hear anything. Okay, so should I just start presenting? Okay, if you can you see the slides? Maybe you can type, Aruj, you can type that up. Can you see the full screen slides? Okay, great. So I'll just start presenting then, because I can't. Great. Thanks for having me, and I'll keep the. Okay, I have 45 minutes. Okay, so I see a chat, and I'll try and keep it to 45 minutes. So I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person with all of you, but I'm at least happy to connect in this particular way. So today I will be talking about a research program on seasonal poverty. And it's a research program that spans Bangladesh, Nepal, Indonesia, and now connections to also the West and Southern African countries. So let me start by giving you an overview of the extent of the problem around the world, how we've identified the nature of the problem, and then we'll talk about some innovations that might help address the problem. So here's a data. This is a project I started back in 2007. And this is the type of data that we have been tracking since then. So this particular data that I'm showing comes from data collected in 2015, 2016. Okay? So on the x-axis, you have different months of the year. And on the y-axis, you have the share of people, poor people in northern Bangladesh, who report that they often miss meals or regularly miss meals or sometimes miss meals or they have to restrict portion size. So, so what you see is in this part of the graph is that in August, September, October, this period, there's a large increase in people who have to restrict portion size or miss meals. Right. So let me explain where this comes from. So December, January, where this goes down, that's the harvest period. This is the main rice harvest in Bangladesh, the almond rice harvest, and you plant in July. Okay? So between July and December, you're basically just waiting for the crop to grow. So there's a reduction in labor demand during that period. So after, during the planting in July, there's a demand for poor people's labor. And then in December, January, again, there's demand for labor. Right? In between, there's not much for people to do. And so wages fall. And the people we're talking about here are people who are working in agriculture. And as you probably know, most people who work in agriculture in South Asia are actually landless. they are supplying their labor to other people's farms. Right? And so when labor demand falls, when wages fall, that's what hurts them. And that's what causes this increase in seasonal deprivation or seasonal hunger. Okay? And this is data from Bangladesh, but this is something we've tracked in Nepal, in Indonesia, eastern parts of Indonesia, the poorer, the poor islands. And also we've tracked in South Africa and West Africa, and a similar phenomenon exists there. Yeah. So, and here's some additional data from a national representative survey in Bangladesh that helps explain what's going on. It goes up, right? And why is food expenditure goes up? Well, why is it going up in that region? It's going up because the price of food rises during that period, right? So this combination of high prices when the price of grain rises, which probably has to do with the fact that there's probably also storage difficulties. It's been the longest time since the last harvest, right? So the combination of rise in prices and fall in labor demand and wages is what leads to a drop in caloric intake. So that's the seasonal deprivation or seasonal hunger. Okay? And this is not a new phenomenon. So this is data, this is from a paper published in the journal Nature in 1884, getting data from from regions that are currently part of India and Pakistan, right? Where you see seasonal patterns in mortality rates even back over 100 years ago, right? And then followed by data from Matlab, Bangladesh, where there's a demographic surveillance site where the population has been intensely tracked for the last 40, 50 years. And you see seasonal patterns there. This is data from the 1970s, right? And collected by the International Center for Diarrheal Disease Research, right? And then when you, from the 1970s, when you follow this population up 20 years later, you still see the seasonality, right? So it's been a long-standing issue, and it's not specific to Bangladesh. Any agrarian area which has this feature of a planting, a harvest, and a pre-harvest period, which is the lean season, will have this problem. Okay? And so what we've tried to do to understand the magnitude and scope of the problem, we have been collecting information on whether you see seasonality in contemporary data. And this is difficult to do because normally we don't collect data this way, right? We don't go and survey the same individuals every month of the year, right? So the trick I use in order to understand the scope of the problem is I take standard surveys like the DHS that's conducted in many, many countries around the world, or the LSMS surveys of the World Bank, that's the Living Standard Measurement Surveys. And the trick is that, you know, because these surveys, samples are very large, they are tracked over the course of the year. So some people are surveyed in January, others in February, March, April, etc. Right? And then in those surveys, sometimes you ask questions like, in the last 2 weeks, what did you eat? Or you measure children, their height, right? And so I have some measurements of children in January, some in September, and nutritional nutritional deficiencies can actually show up in very quickly in children's wasting, etc. So that's what we are plotting here. And what you see is seasonality in, say, number of meals per day in Tanzania. That's coming from the LSMS surveys, but also from the DHS surveys, which are health focused. You see child wasting in rural Bangladesh that also follows seasonal patterns, child wasting in rural India, etc. Right? So we're seeing this phenomenon not only in the distant past, but it's also a contemporary phenomenon in many developing regions around the world. Right? This is why I've been really interested in trying to figure out what we can do about this. Right? So back of the envelope calculation on the basis of all these data suggests that there's close to 1 billion people on Earth who are experiencing some seasonal deprivation. It might not always come in the form of hunger, but it comes in the form of like limiting diet diversity or missing meals, or people being worried about food, so general food insecurity. Okay? And another reason we should worry about this now is that the changing climate might make this type of seasonality even more acute going forward. Okay, okay, so now why do we care? But there's two distinct reasons why this kind of seasonal deprivation is harmful. Right. So first is the failure of consumption smoothing is directly reducing people's welfare. So missed meals, reduced portions, dietary diversity, not getting protein during certain months of the year, right? And so if children are not getting adequate nutrition for 2-3 months of the year, we should worry a lot about that, because that's going to adversely affect both their physical development and their cognitive development, right? And that might make those children less productive later in life, and that's how intergenerational poverty can persist. Okay? So that's one important reason to worry about this problem. And the second important reason, a distinct reason to worry about it, is that people, when they are faced with this type of deprivation and hunger, at that moment, they take some desperate measures. And those desperate measures can create poverty traps, right? So one is, work by my co-author, Kelsey Jack, Gunther Fink, and others in Zambia shows that, during this seasonal hunger period, it's actually called the hungry season in Southern Africa, in Zambia. So what people do is that they end up spending their time tending to other people's farms, like larger landowners' farms, in order to get something to eat during that period, and leave their own farms untended, and that lowers agricultural productivity, right? So in this particular paper, they offer a loan that allows people to just work on their own farm, and they show that later productivity increases. Okay? So basically, people are reducing investments in themselves because they are desperate to just deal with the immediate hunger. Okay? And then the other thing people do is often they enter into credit relationships. So this other paper that's also in Bangladesh, shows that people, out of desperation, they go to their employer or landlord and say, look, I'll work for you. Just give me something to eat. And you don't have work now, but I'll work for you for free later, right? And so they enter into those contracts, and there's an implicit interest rate being charged where you get some food, you work for free later, and that interest rate is extremely high, right? And that's what keeps people poor, which is during the harvest, they're having to spend time working for free. That's going to keep them poor in the long run. Okay, lower educational investments. So that's the issue. Like, those are the two problems. Now the question is, how do you address seasonality? So normally we often think about poverty as a chronic phenomenon, but there's a seasonal dimension to this poverty. So I want to start helping all of us think through, how should we think about seasonal poverty different from chronic poverty, and are there different policy solutions for that? And then I will show you specific results on what types of policies can help address this. Right? So there are two broad ways to think about how to address this problem. So the problem is seasonality, which is a failure of consumption smoothing. Right? The puzzle here is that normally in standard economic models, you would think that people would want to smooth their consumption. Right? And how do you smooth consumption? You can do it intertemporally, which is maybe you can borrow against your future income. So that's going to be a credit contract. Or maybe you can save your past income to eat something now. Okay? So that means that if there is a failure of consumption smoothing, there's probably some credit constraints or savings constraints, and maybe we need to address those. Right? That's how we think about policy design, which is, let's figure out what the problem is, what the source of the problem is, and then what types of markets must be failing, and how do we address those market failures. Right? So one broad way is intertemporal consumption smoothing, and a different way to think about it is that maybe you can smooth spatially instead of temporally. What does that mean? That during that same period in the rural areas where people are going hungry, right? If there are other economies, like the city economy nearby, that does not have the same type of problem, where there's a disappearance of jobs during that particular season, like the pre-harvest lean season in agriculture, then maybe that's another way to smooth. So you just move to a different economy where there are jobs available, and then you send money back or you bring money back. Okay? So that's a spatial solution. Now, if markets are failing in the intertemporal direction, and this is not working spatially either, that means that there might be some market failures in the spatial direction as well, right? So one is trade frictions that might prevent access to lower prices. So a colleague of mine, Kevin Donovan, has done work in Nicaragua where they build foot bridges across the sort of seasonally swelling rivers to show that as you connect remote villages to nearby towns and markets, that improves, right? And there might also be migration frictions, so people would have to move to the city to access better labor markets, but maybe there are some frictions that's preventing them from doing it. So on the migration side, that's the side that I will get into more detail for the rest of the talk. So one fact that I noticed that that motivated me to work in direction connection is that a lot of those people who are facing seasonal deprivation, they often live within 3, 4, 5 hours of locations of city urban economies where there are jobs available. Sorry, I seem to have lost the connection for a second, so I'll just reconnect. Okay, so there are many people who are living near jobs. Okay? So now so that motivated me to try out one particular solution. So we started this in 2008 in Bangladesh, right? Which is, let's go out to the rural households, okay, and offer them either grants or loans, which are travel grants, right? So imagine giving them enough money that pays for a round-trip bus fare to nearby cities. So you go do this in very rural areas, and you pay the bus fare plus enough money to pay the round-trip bus fare plus a few days of food. And the idea is, you just say, look, here's money if somebody from this household wants to try out seasonal migration. The only condition on taking this money is that one person should go and try to look for a job in the city, right? I'm not putting any restrictions on where you go, which city, or who within the household goes, how long you go for. That's the only condition, that one person tries this out. And hopefully they go find work in the city, which often takes the form in Bangladesh and Dhaka on rickshaw pulling or working in construction sites. And then hopefully they send money back home or bring money back home, and that leads to better outcomes, better food security outcomes for their family members at home. Okay? So I did this as a randomized control trial, which means that some randomly chosen villages, I ran this program in different forms. In some places, I offered it as a grant. In other places, a zero interest loan. In other places, I didn't offer money, and I just provided some information on where you can go and what types of jobs are available. And then you have a control group where you did not implement these interventions, right? So I'm going to show you quickly what the results were. So the way to think about these results is to think about, I'm showing you the effects of giving the treatment relative to not getting the treatment, right? And so because it's a randomized control trial, the statistical inference is very simple and it's actually very solid. Okay? So we did this, we started in 2008 in 100 villages. We worked with around 1,900 households, right? And what the first result I'm showing you is that in the control group, a third of households, about 35% of households, do send a seasonal migrant anyway. When you provide information, only 35% send seasonal migrants. So just providing information has absolutely no effect on people's behavior. But when you provide a loan or a grant, right, that 800 taka loan or 800 taka grant, the migration rate jumps up to about 57 to 60%, right? So it goes up by 25 percentage points, which means that for a quarter of the households, you're able to induce them to migrate. Okay, so that's result number one. People go when you give them money. Okay, result number two is what happens when they go, right? And the bottom line number, a pretty significant effect and pretty surprisingly large effect. And so the way I tracked this is that we did detailed consumption surveys in all households, both treatment and control, migrant, non-migrant household in the origin, and we collected detailed information on exactly what people were eating during that lead period. And you see that in the places where I induced the migration, that's where caloric intake, food consumption goes up more than in the control group. Okay? That's result number two. First, if they go, their families eat more. And result number three is a year later in 2009 and 3 years later in 2011, I continued tracking what happens. And what you see is that the migration rate remains significantly higher in the treatment group compared to control. So it's no longer at 60%. Notice the first year when I gave the money it was at 60. It does come down, but it remains significantly higher, right? So that says that about half the people we induced, they choose to go back on their own the next year, right? In the next year, I'm not doing any more intervention. Right? So they changed their behavior in the longer run. Not everybody, but half the people did. Yeah? So now the question is, why did this happen? So we went and asked them that, like, what were you doing? And the majority of people report that they go back and work for the same employer. The employer they met in 2008, right? So the employer is saying, okay, you've proven yourself to be a reliable worker, come back next year, you can have the same job. Okay? And the asset that they're growing is a connection to an employer. Right? So now, so these were the initial research results, right? And then to think about policy, the next thing that happened is, some philanthropists associated with the effective altruism movement from mostly Silicon Valley money. So they approached me saying, okay, look, the research looks good and it looks like a cost-effective way to address seasonal poverty. So why don't we think about scaling this up as a program, right? Now, here I want to make a couple of comments about evidence to policy. So my worry was, look, my reaction to them was, look, I showed you these results with 1,900 households, right? But if you start inducing 20,000 people or 200,000 people to migrate, then the results may not look the same, right? We have to think carefully about what the effects might be at scale, okay? So one set of worries is that we were concerned only in the initial research, we were concerned about the effects directly on the beneficiaries who are receiving those travel grants, right? But maybe there are going to be effects on other people once you start scaling this up, and we should think about that. So what in economics we refer to as general equilibrium effects, okay? And the other set of worries is that we were concerned about kind of the economic effects on consumption, income, etc., where there might be all right, I'm very sorry about all the disturbances, and let's hope it works well from now on. So basically, one set of worries is that there's a whole bunch of non-economic effects that may there's a whole bunch of stop video here. Non-economic effects that may that may change matters, because initially in the research we documented that consumption goes up, income goes up, etc. But what if domestic violence also increases because the men are earning more of the money, which is going to be a risk factor for the women, right? So what we did, going forward, is we conducted more and more research in order to try and answer those questions. Right? What happens to female empowerment, intra-household decision-making? What happens to disease risk? Like, is the migrant bringing back some diseases from the city, right? Just to get a more comprehensive view of what the total effects, aggregate effects of the migration is, right? And note here that, just to talk about research methods for a little bit, note that some things are fundamentally unmeasurable, right? So, for example, if I can go and ask people about divorce rates, about domestic violence, right? But the migration also comes with some family separation, right? It comes with the migrant having to live in an urban slum, and that's not as good for him, right? So of course, family separation is also welfare relevant, right? But it's not a thing where I can go and ask people, okay, tell me about how much you miss your children, and now tell me the dollar values of how much you miss your children, so I can do my cost-benefit analysis. So it will require fundamentally different types of research methods for us to be able to get a full sense of the effects of migration. So there, to understand the value of that fundamentally unmeasurable disutility from migration, I need to start doing some modeling. We write down a macroeconomics model that's rich enough to be able to measure unmeasurable disutility, and then we have to discipline that model with data from the experiment, right? So in the Q&A, I can get into more details on that, how we do it, but I'll just skip it right now. And another set of issues is that there may be spillovers on other behaviors. So when we move to 30,000 people, you might not worry that the city is going to get affected, but even at the scale of 30,000 people, the village might not look the same, right? It could be that, say, all the skilled people migrate when you make this offer, right? And so if there is a complementary in the production function between the skilled people and non-skilled people, right? It could be that the unskilled workers are left worse off because all the skilled people leave, right? Because productivity in the village falls. Okay? So therefore, you need to also start studying at scale what are not only the direct effects, but also the indirect effects on everybody else who lives in the village. If you click forward, I'll tell you a method we use to understand that. So back in 2014, we ran the experiment again, but this time we added another bit of sophistication to the design. So what we did here was, again, we made those migration offers, paying people to travel, but you'll see from the low intensity versus high intensity villages, in some villages, we made the offers to many, many people. Those are the many blue guys on the high intensity line. In other villages, we only offered it to a few people. So like 70% of poor landless households received offers in the high intensity village and only 10% in the low intensity village. So what that does is it creates a different size labor supply shock in the high intensity versus the low intensity village. And then we track, okay, what happens to wages in the two villages? What happens to other people's outcomes in the two villages? And what you actually see is that in the high intensity village, when a lot of people leave, right, that actually improved wages because there's a big labor supply shock, not as many people around to work. And so wages don't fall as much during the season. And that indirectly benefits other households, right? Other poor households who remain behind, right? So in fact, the program actually ends up looking better when you account for that spillover effect. And we can skip forward. To the next slide. Okay, and then in the next phase of the research, we also moved to then working with 150,000 households a year. And then we started, at that stage, we started tracking the urban spillover. Do wages in the city fall? Are these migrants competing away jobs from other people who live in the city? We can skip forward to the next slide. All right, and let's skip forward. I'm going to have to be a little bit more, that's a little too far. I have to be a little bit more quick. Okay, so so what we did was, this is perfect. Thank you. So what we did was, okay, so we learned that in Bangladesh, this project seems to work pretty well, right? In that you can get people to migrate. When they migrate, their family consumes more, and also people remigrate in subsequent seasons, right? So then I thought, okay, where else would this be useful? So we tried running this intervention in Indonesia, in Nepal, and I want to tell you a little bit about what we learned in Nepal. Okay? So one of the things that you see in Bangladesh is that remittance is very difficult, right? Now what happens is that in Bangladesh, people actually carry the money back home because they're traveling nearby. You can skip to the next slide. And so I'll give you a little bit of a model to explain what's happening in Nepal. Next slide. So we have a migrant and his family, and there are 3 states in the world. Okay, so one is the pink is the lean period, right? And in period 1, during the lean season, there are 2 locations. You can be at home or you can be at the destination. So the migrant travels to the destination, typically the male, and the family remains behind. And then you can skip forward. The period 2 is the harvest season. That's much easier. So the migrant returns and gets reunited with his family. Okay? Next. And so in the destination, you earn some income YD. At home, you have this income YH1. Okay? And you can make an investment. Like at home, you either consume your income or you make an investment, and you get a return of F of I, the return on that investment. And note that the migrant can send remittances back. So R1 is the remittance sent back immediately during the lean period. R2 is the remittance sent back later during the harvest. Next. And just click through so that all those things are visible. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. So here's the thing. So in Nepal, we went and wanted to run the same program. We thought, okay, it might work if it worked in northern Bangladesh, it should work in the Nepali Terai, the southern part of the country, not the hills, right? Because it's a similar agroecological zone. But we learned that the project was going to be useless there. And the reason is we spent a whole year piloting in many districts in Nepal. And what we learned was actually they've already solved the problem. Migration is very common. Like in some 84% of households report that they've had a labor migrant in the past. And the majority were planning to send somebody this year, right? So if people are already migrating, then me going in and trying to induce migration doesn't make any sense, right? And so why is it so common? It's because the border with India is open in Nepal, unlike Bangladesh. And so Nepalese are much more used to going to India where the wage gains are even higher. So they go to places like Shimla for apple picking, or they go to Gujarat, Maharashtra, places where the GDP is a lot higher than say in urban Bangladesh. Yeah? Now, okay, so migration is not the solution. They've already figured it out. But here's the puzzle. The seasonal hunger is still high in the village. So I'll show you that in the next slide. Okay? So the picture I started with in Bangladesh, so when I try to draw that picture in Nepal, you get a very similar situation where there's a lean period pre-harvest where food insecurity is high. The fraction of households that are worried about running out of food or reduce their portion size, you see is quite high, over 40%. Okay. So what's the puzzle here is that, thank you. The puzzle here is that, you have migration, but there's still seasonality, right? And what's the problem is because remittances are not coming at the right time. So next. So what's going on is, here's the puzzling picture, okay? So you see the lean period in red and the harvest season in green, right? And the top dots, the dots that are right on top, those are the those are total remittances, okay? The puzzling part of this picture is that notice that remittances go up during the harvest. So remittances are actually pro-cyclical, right? You need the remittance during the red part, where there's hunger in the village, right? But remittances are coming when there's harvest, when there's already income that your family members have in the village, okay? So remittances are pro-cyclical. Next. So now we have to figure out, okay, that's the puzzle. Why is that? Next. Okay, so another, going back to my overall structure, right? We talked about different ways of smoothing consumption. The other problem that's coming through in Nepal is that not only is there migration friction, there's actually that migration friction doesn't exist, but there's some kind of a remittance or a transfer constraint. So what I'd like to talk to you about for the rest of my talk is just to tell you, okay, how do you solve this problem? So we can go to the next slide. So just to summarize, what's happening is, we saw seasonal poverty in Bangladesh. We tried to encourage migration, and it turned out to be a useful solution there. We tried to replicate that solution in Nepal. We learned that it was going to be useless there, right? But there's still seasonal hunger in Nepal, so we have to figure out how to address that. Okay, so here's my model, and notice that there is a R1 that I had in the model, which is people could send money back in the lean season. But basically, that's not possible. People are not sending money back in the lean season. R1 doesn't exist. So you only have R2, so you're bringing money back later, but that doesn't really help the hunger that exists in the lean period. Next. So the way we're going to try and solve that problem is we're going to offer something else. We're going to offer a loan, a consumption loan in the lean season in the village, right? Where we tell people, not like usual microcredit where you have to start paying back every 2 weeks. We tell people, take this loan for your consumption, investment, or what have you, and you can pay back when the migrant returns, because I know that from our data that when the migrant returns, you will have remittance income, right? So you'll be able to pay back. So let me give you a loan right now today, and you can pay me back 3 months later when the migrant returns. Next. So what we're doing is, you want to send money into the red state, okay? And you have money in the white state. Okay. You cannot, but because of a remittance friction, you cannot directly move money from white to red. So what I've done is with the L, I've created a link between red to green, and they already had the linkage between white and green because the migrant comes back home during harvest, right? So that way, by the combination of the remittance that he brings back home plus the loan, I am able to send money into the red state where people really need money for their deprivation. So that's our idea, and that's what we piloted there. Next. You can skip forward, skip this slide, skip. Okay, good. Forward. Okay, so what's this study? So we're doing it in 90 villages, and we see that most people go to India. So why is there a remittance friction? It turns out because you're going to India, right? That creates more problems because bank transfers from India to Nepal is not so easy, right? Next. So the substitute intervention that we do is the seasonal consumption loan, where we say you can have 10,000 Nepali rupees, which is the equivalent of $90 US, right? And the loan is offered after planting and has to be repaid during the harvest. Next, you can skip through to show all the bullets. Okay, skip. Okay, so why is remittance difficult, right? So it's because, you're trying to send money from India. It requires real-time coordination between the migrant and his family. But sometimes the migrant is far away from money transfer station. Sometimes the family members the village is far away from the nearest money transfer station, right? And if you want to use some kind of mobile money transfer or bank transfer, you have to have Aadhaar cards in India, which since the Modi government came into power, they've actually made it more difficult for migrants to have because the BJP government has been very worried about who's really Indian and are there illegal Bangladeshis there, etc. Right? So it's actually made it even more difficult, and the remittance frictions, if anything, has gotten worse recently, and that's the problem that we're trying to solve there. Next. All right. So what we do is we offer this $90 loan and the 10,000 rupee loan, And note, just to keep in the back of your mind, the value of the harvest on average in our data is about 26,000 Nepali rupees, and the migrant income in the destination is usually around 38,000 Nepali rupees. Okay, next. Let's skip over the math. I don't have much time. Okay, and let me actually give you, just actually go back one slide. There, yeah, let's stop there. And let me give you, without going through the math, I want to just talk you through what the theoretical predictions would be, okay? So the first thing is, in the lean season, people consume and invest, right? So if you give them, so basically the first thing is, let's say you were to give them a loan, where I create a connection between the red state and the white state, right? By combination of the loan and the remittance. Okay? So think about what a model would predict, right? And an economics model would predict that now I can send money to the state where the marginal utility of consumption is high because people are hungry there, right? So if I can send money from the destination into the state where the marginal utility of consumption is high, where money is very valuable, then I'm going to be willing to save more of my money in the destination, not spend it in the city, but try to send it to my family members who actually need the money, right? So overall remittances should go up when I offer people the loan. So I'm going to be able to test these predictions because what I'll do is, again, a randomized control trial where some people will get a loan and others not. So I'm going to look in the data, the people who received the loan, how do they behave differently? And the first prediction I have is that those households should be remitting more of their income, meaning they'll consume more in the lean period when they really need food, and they will remit money, they'll bring more money back in the harvest as a way to pay off that loan. Okay. Second, so they will consume more in the lean period, so food security should improve. So they'll consume part of the income, and they can also invest part of the income, right? So they might actually invest in fertilizer, and if they do, so my model predicts that if you get the loan, you'll invest more, right? So they'll invest more in fertilizer, and if they do invest more in fertilizer, then that's going to pay off in the harvest season because agricultural productivity will go up. So we should observe that rice harvest goes up, the amount of rice they're selling goes up, right? And overall, these should improve welfare. So now let's look at the data. In the next slide, we can just click through, and good. So the way I'm summarizing all the results here, instead of like showing you regression tables one after another, is the plus signs are telling you the direction, plus and minus signs are telling you the direction of the effect of offering the loan. So I'm running regressions where the variables you see on the first column, the outcomes, is regressed on whether or not you received a loan, and whether you received a loan was randomized. Okay? So what we first see as theory predicts, if you received the loan compared to people who didn't, right, your remittances go up. And why do we have two columns with 99 and 95 there? Is because we Winsorize the data, because there's some, like extreme outcomes, like outlier outcomes, and we're just like taking the outlier. Right? That's what those columns are, because there's some data entry errors, and that's how we. And then the dark green is where we have statistical precision, like it's significant at 95% confidence, and the light green is when it's significant at 90% confidence. Okay? And so as theory predicts, you see remittances go up, and that's a precise effect. And in particular, as you would predict, harvest season remittances go up. People bring back money in the second period. Okay? And then the theory also predicted that investments should go up. We do see an increase in the purchase and use of nitrogen fertilizer, as well as other inputs, agricultural inputs such as pesticides. Okay? And the other way that people invest is by spending more time in their farms. And where does that come from? It comes from people not migrating to local destinations, so like other villages that also have agricultural work. So they try to avoid doing that, going nearby, which is like low return migration, where wages are not that much higher than your home, right? So they stop doing that when they have the loan, and instead tend to their own farm. Then their farm hours go up. Okay, and so as a result of all these input investments, both in labor, in farm hours, as well as in fertilizer and pesticide, we see that the amount of rice harvest increases, the amount of rice sold, and the revenues received from rice also increases, right? And as a result of all of that, food security improves. So on the consumption side, not only is there investment, food security improves during the lean season, right? So people are less likely to report that they're reducing portion size and reducing meals, etc. And finally, we also ask people about their subjective well-being, like how stressed they are and what they think about their own life. And we see the people who received the loan, randomized to receive the loan, they report that their life is much better than people who were randomized out, not receive the loan. Okay? So that's a summary of all the results. So basically, what I'm saying is, theory, basically, just going back and summarizing. In Nepal, we went to Nepal. We saw the migration was already high, so there's no point. Okay, what's the market failure here? Why are people deprived? And the best idea we could come up with is that there's this remittance friction. People are sending remittances the wrong period, so we offered a loan in order to help them move money into the period when they need it. And when we offer this loan and they're able to move money, then we see all these improvements that you have on the slide in their lives. Let's click forward.
Dr. Mubarak, can you please sum up your presentation in the next 5 minutes, because we need to proceed to question and answer session.
Sure. Actually, I can click forward. I'll actually finish in 2 minutes. So next slide. Next. Next. Okay, so here's the last thing I'll say, which is, okay, all the results that I showed you, is it really a remittance friction? Okay? And the way that we're going to try and address it is that it turns out there are some people in Nepal who are able to send remittances and others not. So we see some people who have access to banks and international money exchange transfer, IME transfers, and others who don't have it. So we're going to look at whether or not the effects are being driven by the people who have the friction, are not able to send remittances, versus those who can. So let's click forward to the next slide. Click forward. I just want to conclude forward. Yeah, so let me just maybe end here. Yeah. So what we are going to do is we're going to, all the effects that I just showed you, we can then look at people, we can divide up our sample into two. The half of the sample are people who I have observed that at some point in the past, they were able to send a bank transfer, right? The other half of the sample are people who've never been able to send a bank transfer, okay? So if you look at the effects, so overall, the effects are actually much, much larger when from the loan. The effect of the loan is much, much larger on the half of the sample that have never remitted by bank. That's where the effects, that's exactly where you see the effects. So I'm showing you total remittances. Next slide. And then you see that it's people who remit by hand. It's the remittance by hand that's actually going up, exactly as the model would predict. And let me, if you go to the next slide. So I'll just end here instead of talking about more and more stuff. So let me just say, so like the investment outcome, fertilizer, right? So here we look at the sample that have used a bank at some point versus people have never used a bank. And what you see is that the investment effect is also coming entirely from people who have never been able to use a bank. So it's exactly precisely the people who had this difficulty of sending remittances that they're the ones who are able to benefit from the loan program, which is strongly suggestive that exactly the loan is working exactly because of the remittance friction. So let's stop sharing slides, and I'll just make a couple of verbal comments and wrap up. So again, sorry about all the technical difficulties. So let me just kind of give you an overall summary and conclusion and the way forward. Okay. So the overall conclusion for me is, first, seasonal poverty is an important problem, and it remains an extremely important issue across the entire developing world in agrarian societies. That's true in South Asia, it's true in West Africa, it's true in Southern Africa. Okay? And there are many different markets that are failing. So, there might be a credit market failing, savings difficulties, there might be migration failures, it's difficult to migrate, there might be remittance failures. And it's important for us to figure out in a given context, right? What's the failure? What's the market failure that we need to target? In Bangladesh, it was a failure of migration. Migration costs were too high. Actually, what we learned from that research is that people found migration to be too risky. So very poor people don't want to take the risk of moving to the city, spending their last $10 on a bus ticket, and then returning home empty-handed. Okay? In Nepal, that wasn't the issue. We saw remittance friction. Okay? Now, we are also working in Southern Africa, and we're trying to figure out, okay, what is the right strategy to address the same seasonal poverty and seasonal hunger problem in those contexts. And let me tell you what I'm doing in Nepal right now. I'm actually coming to you from rural Nepal. That's where I'm sitting right now. And that may explain a little bit of the technical difficulty with that. What's going on is, what I've learned while doing this work that I just described to you is that there are some people who go to much better destinations in India and others who go to worse destinations. What do I mean by better or worse? Some destinations in India, right, offer higher wages, like, during a season. So if you go to Shimla, you can do apple picking, right? And that offers pretty high wages, okay? And there are other destinations people go to where the wages don't seem to be that much higher, right? So then I'm trying to now think about, okay, can we improve migration outcomes by inducing people to try to switch destinations and go to places where there's better work available and wages are higher? Okay, and so why do I think destination switching might be important? Is because what I observe in Nepal in our data is that why is it that people are going to the low-wage destination? It turns out we see that people go to the destinations where everybody else in their village and caste also go. Okay, that there are strong network effects in migration, which anybody who studies migration knows a lot about, right? That you go with your friends, you go with people you trust. Okay? So basically what that suggests is that maybe some people are stuck in a wrong equilibrium. You go to this poor destination because everybody else is going there, right? But we collected all this data on which destinations are good, but using that data, maybe I can improve matters, right? So now what I'm doing in rural Nepal today, yesterday, tomorrow, is to figure out, okay, how do we make people feel comfortable switching their destination? It turns out that's not an easy problem to solve because they're also already used to going to one place year after year. They go with their friends, they go with their relatives, right? And so what I'm trying to do right now is try to figure out what intervention can make people feel more comfortable. So we are trying to set up this mentorship program. So we identified some high quality migrants who have success, and we pair them with the people who are going to other destinations. So the idea here is seasonal poverty is a big problem, but let's try and identify the market failures and solve the problems that's context relevant. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mushfiq. That was indeed a very insightful session. Now I request the audience to ask any questions they might have.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sada from Punjab University.
Walaikum assalam.
I was listening the seasonal poverty and hunger. You have taken almost all the factors like destination, migration, credit constraints, loans, saving. But there are some social protection programs, particularly in Bangladesh. Recently, I was looking them. Conditional and unconditional transfer programs. They also help to tackle the seasonal poverty and hunger. I think they should be added also to figure out the problem and what they do to tackle the seasonal poverty and hunger in Bangladesh. That's my question.
Yes, sure. That's an excellent point. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we know from the data on conditional cash transfers, unconditional cash transfers. Yeah? So now note that the original program in Bangladesh that I tried, right, was actually a conditional cash transfer. But what is the condition? The condition is you have to migrate. Like somebody from the household, the only condition is somebody from the household should try this out, right? Unlike other conditional cash transfer programs, where the condition might be send your daughter to school, right? So when you add the condition, when I talk about, so you should actually interpret what I just showed you as a conditional cash transfer, but the condition is migration, right? So we actually tried out unconditional cash transfer side by side as much of an effect. So what happens is that if you give an unconditional transfer, people are so desperate and hungry during that period. And answer this question well, I have to explain why is it that we saw the original effects in Bangladesh that I described. The reason we saw it is because people find migration very risky, right? So imagine I offer you a lottery ticket that costs $10, right? And I tell you, 80% of the time, this lottery will pay off. right? And you'll get like a 500% return. Your $10 will become $60, okay? But 20% of the time, you will lose your money, okay? So is that a good lottery ticket? I mean, that's like the migration ticket, you know? It is a very good deal, right? You and I would definitely buy that ticket, right? Because 80% of the time, if I get 500% return, that's fantastic, right? But what I'm observing is that people aren't buying that ticket, okay? So why is that? It's because now imagine I offer you this ticket, but you're very close to subsistence. You're extremely poor, okay? And I tell you that, look, you're surviving, but 20% of the time when you lose your last $10, somebody might go below subsistence, okay? Then even though it's a really attractive option, I still cannot invest in that option because I cannot handle that risk. So the downside risk dominates my decision, right? So how the program is working is by helping people get over the risk, because in the program I'm saying, take this money, try migration. If it doesn't work out, just come back. You're no worse off because I paid for it. Okay? It's like it's offering an insurance to them, right? And that's why the conditional one works.
Any more questions? Dr. Heyman has a question in the front row.
All right. Thank you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for presenting your research at IBA and addressing very, very important issue. The question I have is hunger and poverty not only varies from season to season or month to month, but also cross-sectionally from province to province, district to district. So when you use this household survey data, so I think it's very nice trick that you use the data that when the survey was taken place. So how did you control for the cross-sectional variation when you say that this is a seasonal poverty? Part of this poverty could be because of cross-sectional variation in hunger and poverty. And
yes.
So that's the first question. And also second question is, the surveys usually take place in few months, and how did you simulate and calculate it for the entire year? And I have also comment that in Pakistan, especially this is a rural phenomena because harvest and lean season. So in that case, usually rural people store the food when the food prices are low, and they just buy rice or wheat for the entire period until the next season. So maybe this could be the important strategy to address this issue, and maybe there can be a way out that there can be some loans or something to actually motivate that they can store the food. So maybe this could be the important way to address this issue. And maybe you can do some RCT on this. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Actually, I'm happy to say that RCT has been done. So it was done in Kenya by another co-author named Ted Miguel and Lauren Bergquist, where you're absolutely right. Like when I was talking about, savings constraints, right? That's another type of constraint, which is, you don't have to save money. You can save your grain, right? So save your grain so that in the lean season, when prices are high, that's when you can eat it, okay? But another act of desperation that we see, or maybe there are some other psychological factors, we see that people in Kenya, from that study, they show that people actually sell their grain at the wrong time, right? And sometimes they actually have to buy back. They run out of food and then they have to buy back when prices are high, right? So you're selling low and buying high. It's like the opposite of what you would expect. And they offer a loan, and as you predicted exactly, that when they ran the randomized control trial, the people who were offered the loan, they are less likely to engage in this damaging behavior, right? So there seems to be other market failures about storage, right? And sometimes that has to do with, if you have too much food in your house, then your cousins and everybody else might start asking you for some money, right? Or it could also be temptation, right? If you have too much money at one time, you end up spending it on the wrong things, right? So I think there is, for this problem to persist, there has to be multiple market failures, right? And I think that's what's going on. And we do need to think comprehensively about all the possible problems and solutions. And going back to your first question, yeah, we actually control for the cross-sectional, so the effects I showed you, the graphs I showed you, I didn't show you the full specification, but we are holding constant all the cross-sectional variation and only looking at the intertemporal variation. So you have to, the assumption you have to make is that, the timing of the surveys in January, February, March, April, May, across the different types of regions is not systematically related to the poverty level, right? It's not that they're going to poor household first and then they go to rich household, right? That's the assumption you have to make to use that data. And to get the full year-round data, what we have to do is, like, the DHS is conducted multiple times every 3 years, right? So we also have to put in survey year fixed effects and then use multiple rounds of DHS to create like an entire year. And then since you mentioned IBA, I promised my father I would mention it. So as soon as I told him that I was planning to give a talk at IBA Karachi, he said that he was admitted with scholarship to the first or second class of IBA Karachi back in the 1960s, sometime, maybe 66, 67, something like that. He didn't leave his family behind. He couldn't go. And then the next year he got an offer from Government College in Lahore, and then he got his degree from Government College. Because, he was telling me the reason he didn't go to IBA, he didn't understand, he wasn't from a business family. They came from a farming family. So he's like, I don't know, what am I going to study business? What do I learn there? So he just had no idea. So instead he studied English literature, right? So I feel like it was a missed opportunity.
We have time for one more question. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Mubarak. I would like, is it not the case that you are trying to find, the market failure through another market failure? For example, what you are suggesting that there must be a loan intervention. But the question is that by this you are suggesting a microfinance. While the microfinance for a consumer is already a market failure, another intervention you are suggesting that they should go to high wage or highly paid destination. But it is also a market failure because it requires information and there is a very high cost of information. So don't you think outside the market, that the solution of this might not be inside the market, but there is a possibility that it might be lying outside the market? Thank you.
Sure. I feel like the solutions we are talking about in some ways is outside the market. Okay, so let me give you a more comprehensive discussion of what the solutions might be. Right. So let's start with go to better destinations. Okay. So you're right. The information is costly. The market for information is not there. Right. So what we are doing is in Nepal, we conducted surveys in hundreds of villages, right? So based on all of that information we gathered from migrants in hundreds of villages, we now know what's a good destination, what's a bad destination. And the solution we're proposing is basically to leverage all this extra information that we have, right? To induce migrants to choose better destinations, because it's very costly for them to gather that information themselves. They cannot go and ask hundreds of villagers, where do you go and how is it? Right? So, and I'm not, now we're talking semantic, where a market solution would be, maybe I can sell this information, right? Or another solution could be I work through an NGO and I just provide this information and try to make them feel comfortable migrating. And I'm doing the latter. I'm not trying to sell it. I'm just trying to work through an NGO and providing that information. Okay? And another way to interpret your question is, it is, the main result that I showed you from the loan program in Nepal, that's a very indirect solution. Okay? So the market failure there is a remittance failure. Okay? And I'm saying because remittances are difficult, I'm going to use this loan program to do it. Okay? And it is microfinance, but note it's a very specific type of microfinance. It's a type of microfinance where I say, you take money now, and I know when your migrant will return, you have to give me money back 3 months later when your migrant family member returns. Okay? Now, a more direct solution than the indirect microfinance solution I have, the more direct solution would be, why don't I just make remittances easier? Okay? The problem is that's a much more direct solution, and I would opt for that if I could. The problem is that the Modi government has made it very difficult for me to play with that solution, try to induce that solution. right? Because they're making it more difficult for migrants to get the identity cards that will allow them to use formal money transfer mechanisms, right? So because I cannot solve the remittance friction, that's why I'm indirectly trying to solve it through the loan program.
Dr. Mubarak, thank you very much for your time. We have many more questions from the audience, but we shall email them to you and you can respond at your convenience. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure learning from you. Hope to keep in touch with you.
Absolutely. No, thank you for this wonderful organization. Thank you for inviting me. And I'll just say that one reason I chose to talk about this work is that perhaps somebody will note that the seasonal poverty phenomenon is also relevant for Pakistan. And I would be very happy to connect and to learn more about the nature of the problem, dimensions of the problem in Pakistan, and hopefully we can jointly brainstorm possible solutions and then test them out like we're doing in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now request our audience to move to the hall for tea. I request all the students who are attending the conference to move to the front of the auditorium so we can take you for a campus tour. Thank you very much.
And everybody who has some kind of question, they can mail us at you can write it down or you can mail us. We'll give you the email and then you can mail us. Okay, thank you.